Hey, it's Jeff Hyman, your startup therapist, where we focus on solving the people part of startups. And there's probably no more important people part than communications. And I am joined by a master, you could call him a god of communications, John Lee Dumas. How are you, John?
Hey, I'm doing great, and just one of those things where if you do anything enough, even by default, like you're going to get okay at it. And I've done 1,200 interviews now, so that's the only reason I'm good at it.
I am way behind you, so you'll probably be leading the charge on this interview. We're going to talk today about podcasting. You are one of the pioneers, one of the legends in the podcasting industry, and many of our entrepreneurs, folks watching this interview, are interested in understanding how to use it potentially to get in front of more customers, more potential customers. That's going to be our focus today. I'm going to introduce you briefly, and then we're going to get right into it. Sound okay?
Yeah, sounds amazing. You can tell that you're the video guy,
Yeah,
and I'm the audio
you're the
guy.
audio guy.
You got the books behind you. You got a nice shirt on. I got my hat and my headphones and my mic and the couch. So this is going to be fun.
And I'll add that I'm in winter Chicago. You're in summer San Diego.
Yeah, that's why I was like, give me 5 minutes. I got to put a shirt on real quick, Jeff.
I won't even ask what the temperature is. So let's get into it. You are the founder, the host of EOFire, which I understand is short for Entrepreneurs on Fire. It's an award-winning podcast, and what's amazing to me, John, is you do this every day, 7 days a week.
365 a year.
You've done 1,200 back-to-backs. You've been at it for almost 4 years?
Yeah.
Got it. Which is incredible, obviously, and we'll talk about that, because I do 2 of these a week, and I'm exhausted from doing that. You've been kind enough to share that you're doing over $300,000 a month in revenue. Our entrepreneurs who think a lot about business models will want to understand how that's even possible. Many of them would kill for that just in their core business. And you're doing, about 1 million unique listeners a month or something like that?
Yeah, 1.3 last month.
Which is amazing. So I'm thrilled to really understand this. Let's start with the obvious, which is why podcasting? Why has it become so important? And I guess I'll add on to that, why audio podcasting versus video, which is what I tend to do. Why would you limit yourself to audio only, other than you like wearing a hat?
Yeah, and also you'll probably be converted to audio only by the end of my little spiel
Good.
Right now.
I'm open to it. This may be our last video interview, right?
We have moved into, and we've been moving into, and we have officially moved into the on-demand society. We are now, DVR and everything, Netflix on demand. We have Amazon Prime. I mean, everything that we do is on demand. We watch and we listen to what we want to, when we want to, and what's pretty cool now is where we want to. And it's just becoming really exciting to see this world. So we're being trained to do that. Back when you and I were younger, Jeff, I mean, there was 6, 8, and 13. Those were the TV channels.
Yep, that's it.
And whatever was playing, baby, we were watching it. We were watching commercials. We were there. We were doing it. I mean, I remember when 8 o'clock used to mean something because that's when, the good shows would start.
Yep.
And now it's like the good shows start when I say they start.
Whenever you're ready.
I won't even start the New England Patriots, that's my football team, until an hour and a half after the game starts because I want to be able to fast forward through commercials, halftime, so you get where I'm going.
The hardest part is avoiding the spoilers, right?
Yes,
staying away from people that have seen Star Wars already.
So true. So we have moved into this on-demand society, and podcasting fits so well in with this because what I love to say about podcasting is that you can say yes to listening to a podcast without having to say no to anything else. I mean, Jeff, I go on a run every day here in the Bay in San Diego. I have to drive every now and then somewhere. I have to wash dishes. I have to fold laundry. I have to do these different things. And I can be listening to a podcast during all of those times. In fact, I've gone to the place now where I can't be folding laundry without listening to a podcast because, it went from being a painful activity to something I'm like, oh my God, I can actually go fold some socks and listen to my favorite podcast episode.
And John, you find that your audience can really absorb and multitask. I mean, we all multitask, but your interviews they're pretty heavy duty. I mean, we're not talking about listening to background music. They're interviews, right? You want to absorb the content. How do you do that when you're doing something else?
Yeah, and I'll kind of have to make a little caveat there. It's my interviews are very story based. They're not tactical. There's not tools, tips, and tactics. It's not like that type of thing.
Yeah.
Where it's you got to kind of be there, maybe writing things down. It's that is where EOFire, I think, is unique and why it's been able to grow is because people know that, hey, I can press play. I can go for a run. And maybe I've heard of Jeff. Maybe I've heard of Tim Ferriss or Gary Vaynerchuk, some of my past guests.
Yep.
And they're going to tell me stories of their worst entrepreneurial moment and the lessons they learned, of their aha moments and how they achieved success from those, their best advice, the books that they're reading. They're going to tell me these things in a very story format.
So it's more of an audiobook type of content where you're telling a story. Is the inverse hold true then? Would you not recommend podcasts as a medium for hardcore information and fact delivery? If people are using them as a second multitasking, maybe it's not a great medium for here are the 7 ways to get rich, or here's the 3 things you need to do.
So I would give it like an A and a B rating. I think podcasts are like A, like they really are in their groove when it's kind of more of that story format.
Got it. Okay.
But I honestly still believe they're very valuable when you're listening to them, and that's why I'm giving them a B. That's still a really high grade when you're getting tactics and technical, because we can retain a lot of information.
Yep.
I mean, we listen, we learn. We're very big on that. The only thing that I give it like a C and a D on is when you start getting very visual.
Yep.
When you want to say like, hey, like this is like how you draw on Photoshop or something like that, or this is how you code in HTML.
Sure.
That stuff's important. But 2 talking heads, to be honest, they're not missing much right now if they're just listening to audio. I mean, you're a good-looking guy, Jeff, but it only took me a couple seconds to realize that.
Keep going. So the reason you don't focus on video is it doesn't lend itself to as much of that background listening because it's a visual medium. Is that right?
There's a lot of reasons. I'll get into a couple of the top ones. Number one, my podcast listener, I know my avatar. That's my perfect listener. I sat down, I created who my avatar is. I won't get into him now, but I could tell you about 10 minutes of information about him. He's 35 years old. He has a wife, 2 kids. He drives to work, 27-minute commute. I know my avatar inside and out. His name is Jimmy. So I know that he's going to listen to my podcast when he's driving to work, when he's, sitting on the couch feeling sorry for himself, at the end of the night and the TV's off and his wife's trying to sleep so we can't have anything on. Like, I know my avatar. I know my listener. So that's critical. Now, let's be honest. We are in 2015. Some of you might be watching this in 2016. And even now, these guys right here, and your tablets and et cetera, don't have a ton of memory.
Right.
This interview is going to come out to be about 500 megabytes.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
The same exact interview, audio only, is going to be about 15 megabytes.
Yeah.
And so people have to stream it, have to download it. They have to do all these different things. So because my listeners are going to be listening audio only anyways, I'm going to give them. And so that's actually why when we talked a little bit of pre-interview chat, Jeff, you were like, I'm thinking about making this to a podcast. Like, my advice to you, which by the way doesn't come cheap, I'm just kidding, it's free, would be, well, just take the audio out, and then you release that as a podcast.
It's easy. It's easy to go from video to audio, obviously. Yeah. How do you? So let's rewind the clock, because this is probably the question most of our folks are most interested in, because they aren't doing podcasting today to build a business. How'd you get started? And I don't mean. I guess what I mean is, how do you start? You've built an amazing brand, and you've been at it 1,200 episodes. You've done your 4th episode. No one's listening. All you hear is crickets. How do you break through the noise? There's kind of a few podcasts now. So how would you, if you were starting today, I guess is really the more relevant question, what would you do?
If I was starting today, I would say, what can I be super niched about? Like, what can I bring to the marketplace that is super unique? And I don't know a ton about your show, but I know that it does have a niche, and maybe it's even more niche than what we initially talked about. But about like venture capital and funding and VCs and all this stuff. Like, that's a niche. Like, you're going to attract a certain type of listener, and you're going to repel a ton of people, which is good. Like, if you're not repelling a ton of people, that means those people that you are attracting aren't raving. They're
so you need to err on the side of being ultra focused if you're going to have a successful podcast.
Not even just err. You need to make a point to say, I am going to niche down again, and then niche till it hurts. And people are terrified to do this shit because they're like, oh my God, it's like there's 500 billion people on iTunes. Like, I want everybody to listen to my podcast. Okay. But nobody's going to, because if you try to please everybody, you're going to please nobody.
Sure. Positioning 101.
The reality is this. Like, you need to niche down until it honestly hurts, realizing that once you've built those first few fans, like Jeff, like if you were to say launch this today, you don't have 50 episodes, and you're just like, I'm just going to focus on how to get the venture A round of funding. Like, I don't even know if I'm using the right words, but like the A round. Like, if you're just going to do that, like if you're just going to focus on that first thing, the people that listen to your podcast are going to be super passionate. They're going to tell all of their friends, hey, this is how you get to your A round. This is
Right.
how you get your initial seed funding. Like, boom, you're going to be the podcast. And
Right.
guess what? You're going to build up a following, momentum, a niche. And then guess what? As you start to make a name for yourself, now you're going to get featured in TechCrunch and blah, 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 and all these other places. And now you're going to be like, okay, now I'm really building credibility and authority, and I have an audience. I can start to broaden out a little bit and start to do B round and C round and all these different things, and like what it means to have options and shares and do all these different things. And it doesn't start until you niche.
So it's a tip of the spear, or a beachhead approach on an island.
That's a good.
And then you're broadening once you start to get some distribution and followers.
So I'm going to use that. Like I'm going to give credit. I'm going to give credit to
You
you
can do
twice,
that.
and then I'm going to keep it.
Good. It's all yours. How many?
No, twice. I'm going to give you credit.
How many is a lot? I mean, in podcasting, if you're going to be ultra focused, which I happen to agree with you, 500, 1,000, 10,000 in today's scope of podcast listeners. How do you know when you've even got traction? You've got a million unique listeners a month. So rewinding the clock, how did you know? Okay, this is actually kind of working.
Just by the growth, and that's all people should focus on. And I'm a big believer in business as well. Like if I made $1 last month and I've made $2 the next month, I'm thrilled with that growth.
So the percentage growth, not the absolute numbers.
Just the absolute percentage. I want to see that percentage growth going up consistently every month, and hopefully every now and then having a couple of jumps when I make major breakthroughs. Like if you look at my graph, 4 years ago, I was here, and it's just one of these slow bell curves that goes up. There's no hockey stick. I know in some businesses, that's how business works.
Yeah.
But with podcasting and with growing an audience, it's a slow growth that, again, does start to speed up because it starts to, build up on its own.
Yeah.
But it's that slow, steady bell curve. So that's what you're looking for with an audience growth focus.
Was there any point in time over the past, 4 years, 5 years, where you did start to sense, okay, that slope is changing because of something you did, or was it sheer word of mouth and people spreading the word?
It was a combination of the both. It really was. And, that the latter that you just mentioned, that's going to happen if you stick with it and you're consistent enough. And the prior is because I was starting to find my voice. It took me 200, 300, 400 episodes before I really found my voice, before I found what I was trying to bring as the host of EOFire and how to bring out the best with my guests. And, now I'm episode 1200 and I'm still learning and I still will continue to. But, where I was before, on a scale of 1 to 100, a 6, now I'm a 76.
So the quality has gotten better, a lot better over time.
A ton.
And what about the length? So one thing I've learned is there's a drop-off. People only have short attention span theater. So what have you learned? I'm sure you've tested different lengths, so you've probably gone back and reviewed lengths. What's the optimal length?
So I've never tested lengths, and I get that question all the time about what's the best length, what's the best frequency, how many times per week, all these different things. And the answer is always the same.
Depends.
There are podcasts that kill it at 3-4 hours. Roman Mars, one of the biggest podcasts in the world, 3.5-hour podcast. There's another podcast that's called the Daily 5-minute podcast or whatever, and it's 3 to 4 minutes every single day, and it kills it. Why? Because they know their avatars. Right. They know their perfect.
And you've used that word a few times. Avatar means target market. Is that what you're saying?
No.
What do you mean?
Avatar means you're one perfect listener.
Got it.
There's a targeted demographic.
Yeah.
And then there's an avatar.
Got it.
And a lot of people go for the targeted demographic. Here's an example. I want my podcast listenership to be women between the ages of 17 and 45 years old in the Midwest. And my question is, whoa. When's the last time you talked to a 17-year-old woman?
Yeah.
Okay, remember that. Now, when's the last time you talked to a 45-year-old woman?
Right. So it's not specific enough.
Were those conversations even similar? Was there anything that was similar about those conversations? Probably not. So because of that, realize that you need to start with that one perfect listener. And just like everybody's terrified to niche into that niche, which is why they all fail.
Yep.
Everybody's terrified to have that one listener because they think, well, nobody else is going to listen to me.
Sure.
Believe me, there aren't 1.3 million Jimmies listening to my podcast every month.
Right.
I have people all over the spectrum.
But you started someplace. You started someplace.
And I've stayed there. I still speak to Jimmy every day.
So knowing that you do a daily format, roughly how long is your episode, roughly, on average?
And I have a very consistent
Yep.
length. I've just because it's never tested because it's always been the same.
Yep.
It's been about 25 minutes.
Okay, got it.
Right around there.
Got it. And the mine are about 15, 20 minutes. So you said other dailies, they might be 5 minutes. The one that was 3-4 hours, that's what, once a week, once a month?
A couple times a week, I think.
Got it. Okay, so there's probably some inverse relationship there that people want to think about, right? I'm guessing.
Maybe. Again, it's going to go down to sit down, craft your one perfect listener,
Yep.
and then say, hey, Jimmy, who's the name of my avatar, how many times per week would you want this podcast to be? In my avatar, Jimmy said 7 days a week. That's the answer.
Yep.
25 minutes, because that's how long my commute to work is. And that's what I did.
Got it. What's been the most effective way that you've been able to get feedback from Jimmy on topics, length, etc.? I'm sure you have a ton of feedback now coming at you with 1 million people in Fire Nation. But when you were at the beginning, 50 listeners, 100 listeners, did you do any kind of email surveys? Did you email people or anything, or did you just go by your gut?
Even less scalable than that. When I got emails from people, I would say, oh, you enjoy Entrepreneur on Fire? Do you have 5 minutes? Can we jump on a Skype call real quick? And I would have so many of these conversations where they come on and say, hey, how'd you hear about Entrepreneur on Fire? Oh, really? Okay, let me write that down so I can amplify that.
Got it.
What don't you like about Entrepreneur on Fire? Okay, let me write that down and take it as a grain of salt. But if a lot of those grain of salts add up, then maybe I'll take it seriously and maybe I'll change that. And what's your biggest struggle right now? And the people are saying, well, how do I create, grow, and monetize my own podcast? 2,800 members later, $3.5 million of revenue in 2 years, podcaster's paradise. So that's the value of the one-on-one conversations.
Got it. So a lot of mother-in-law research early on. Tell us about the business model. You've been kind enough to share some of these revenue numbers, which are staggering, $300,000 a month, $3 million over a couple of years. Without sharing anything you can't, what are the basic tent poles that you've built as a business model around podcasting?
Well, I share everything. I do a monthly income report in detail every single month, EOFire.com/income. My CPA comes on. He verifies everything. He does all my numbers. He comes on. He puts his stamp. He says, hey, these are all real numbers. This is legit. I'm, a CPA.
Why do you do that? What's the purpose of that? Just the audience
just because
knows?
a lot of people are like, oh, is these numbers real? And I get it because it's just some dude on the internet.
Yeah.
And so I just have him come on as a CPA, and he just, boom, puts his stamp there. And, there's still some people who are like, oh, I'm sure he's lying.
Sure.
Whatever. But, EOFire.com/income, I list everything out. I'm talking every penny of expenses, which are significant.
Yep.
Every penny of money that we bring in the door, which is even more significant. One thing I'm sure that your audience, which is kind of a game changer, is, we do about 75% profit margins, which is insane. When, in the month of October, we did $540,000 in gross revenue, and we netted $450,000.
Fantastic.
So
congratulations.
Thank you. That's the kind of business that I've created, and it's not for everybody. There's ways that people would rather, and I get that, say, well, I'd rather make nothing for 10 years and then walk away with $100 million. And I get that. That sounds nice to me, too.
Yeah, but if you think about it, your expected value, what you've been able to build over a few years, is higher than any expected value of a venture-funded startup, most of which fail and net at zero. So you're right. A lot of people, including those watching this video, want to swing for the fences. You've taken a different approach, but you've obviously done very well. What are the biggest components? I know there's a lot of different components, so we don't have to get into all of them.
Ones.
Yeah, the big ones.
Sponsorships. So I have a 7-day-a-week podcast, so I get 30 sponsors per month for the episodes. Okay. That brings in about $100K a month. So
and roughly how many people did you need to have before sponsors even paid attention to you?
About 2,000 to 3,000 listens per episode, keyword. 2,000
to 3,000 listens per episode. Okay.
Per episode, yeah. So I'm, at this point now with my listenership, I'm doing about $100K a month. Yep. That fluctuates a little bit because it's based on your downloads, but it's very consistently at that number. Also do significant revenue with Podcasters Paradise, which is my community where I teach people how to create, grow, and monetize their own podcast. Okay. And that fluctuates a lot too, depending on how many webinars I do and da-da-da. So, these numbers definitely fluctuate.
Yeah, but that's education and training, right?
Totally. Education and training is a big number for that. Okay. Affiliate relationships. So I bring people on my show that have products and services of their own. We talk about them. We invite my listeners to an actual webinar with them. Yep. And then when I get my affiliate split, which is typically 50% of all sales done on that webinar.
Just on that one webinar, not recurring over time.
Well, actually, no. So good question. So every single person that signs up for that webinar gets tagged to me.
Got it.
And so even if they don't even show up on that webinar, if they ever convert into a sale, that's my sale.
So you're really when I say monetizing your audience, we could talk about sponsorships and education, but you're directly monetizing when people come on your show and they promote and discuss a product. You get tagged for your audience, and you're off to the races.
You got it. And I say the other big one is a community that we've created. It's a 5-figure a month revenue model. It's called Fire Nation Elites, where we kind of have this mastermind. We cap it at 100 people. They pay $100 a month. And we teach, kind of just have like this mastermind. It's like a Facebook group. We do monthly trainings, etc. So that's another way that you can monetize off of an audience. Got it.
Last question, because I know we're getting short on time. Fire Nation is this tribe that you've built, 1 million people or so. Is that right? Or 1 million unique listens a month. So how many?
Yeah, there's a difference between people and like listens. But yeah, and that's unfortunately one of the drawbacks of podcasting, which is you can track the amount of listens that you get.
So but not the number of people, right?
Right. You don't know. But that's the thing, though, too, is like my podcast is playing in a car. That's one listen, but there's 5 people in that car.
Right.
So it's really an interesting thought process. No.
But certainly your tribe, to use Seth Godin language, is hundreds of thousands of people easily. How do you, when you go to bed at night and you're kind of thinking about this tribe of people, the John Lee Dumas fan club, Fire Nation people.
Fire Nation.
Fire Nation.
I don't like the word fan club.
Fine. How do you kind of think about it? What is the end goal that you want to build this to, if you have one? I don't mean do you want to sell the business, but when you think about that audience, where do you want to take them? And I'm asking that because I think a lot of our listeners that are thinking about starting a podcast should start with the end in mind. Where do I want to take this group? Great, I get 100 people, 1,000 people. That's all wonderful. Where am I taking my tribe that I'm leading?
Yeah, what's interesting about that is, number one, I would use the word ripple effect. Like, I'm really looking for my audience, Fire Nation, to inspire others. So, like, I'm excited that I'm inspiring my audience, Fire Nation, to take their entrepreneurial leap, that I am, in turn, loving seeing them now inspiring people who are like a third degree of separation. And number two is they're really driving the ship, and they know it. Because I ask them, I send them those email surveys you talked about. I say, hey, what are you struggling with? They tell me, and then I create the solution for them, or I go find somebody who's already created the solution, bring them in, give that solution to them in the form of a product, service, and community, and keep 50% of that. So those are the ways that my kind of business is run, and it's really being driven by Fire Nation.
It's a servant leadership mindset, right?
Good way to put it.
Good, John. Fantastic stuff. Just give the stats. Where can people learn more? Where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah, cool. Well, all the magic happens at EOFire.com. We have a lot of free courses there. We have a free podcast course, a free webinar course. We're all about just giving value. And, of course, that's where my podcast is as well, which I'd love for you to check out. And kind of a final cool call to action is, like my audience was telling me, John, we are struggling setting and accomplishing goals. So my passion project of 2015 was to create the solution to that, which I now am actually holding in my hand, and it is the Freedom Journal.
Cool. Great.
And
Love
the
it.
tagline is set and accomplish your number one goal in 100 days.
Love
so
it.
It's something I'm very passionate about. If anybody wants to, learn more about the Freedom Journal, and if they're thinking, hey, I have a goal that I want to set and accomplish in 100 days, because that's how I work, 100-day sprint. So I wanted to put that down into a book. Just visit thefreedomjournal.com. We have a killer Kickstarter campaign kicking off in January, but I give you at thefreedomjournal.com the first 30 days for free, so you can check it out, see if it's for you, and you're off to the races.
Great. John, thank you so much. Fantastic. I appreciate your time, and we're all going to check it out for sure.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, John.